Well, opinion polling here in Germany indicates there's strong support among Germans for increasing the country's military budget. 66% are in favor of more defense spending, according to a survey by Infratest dimap. That will be welcome news for the probable next Chancellor of Germany, Friedrich Merz. He's currently negotiating coalition terms with the Social Democrat SPD. Both parties say they want to spend hundreds of billions of euros on Germany's defense, but questions remain about what exactly Germany will spend the money on and how much it might all cost.
After Russia's full-scale attack on Ukraine began in 2022, Olaf Scholz announced 100 billion euros of special borrowing to bring Germany's armed forces up to scratch. Now, those likely to form the next government plan to unleash even greater sums. We understand that the funds for the defence of our alliance and our country must now be significantly expanded. In 2024, Germany's defence spending went above the 2% NATO target for the first time. But what allies need and the security situation demands is changing fast.
Meanwhile, the minimum capability requirements of NATO have been adjusted. We have to establish 5 or 6 new brigades in Germany only, so additional money will be needed.
The talk is of hundreds of billions in extra funding. Some of that will go to things Germany is already committed to, such as its mission to build up a troop presence in Lithuania as NATO bolsters its eastern flank. That could cost an extra 170 billion euros over the next 10 years. There's also a plan to boost Germany's air defence capability. The price tag for that, over 100 billion euros. And the shopping list goes on. Then there's the area of cyber defence, satellites, logistics, target defence, in fact the entire scope of overall defence, which is why we're talking about significantly different sums. Add to all that the cost of replacing US forces stationed in Germany and the rest of Europe if they were withdrawn, perhaps another 30 billion euros. Some politicians also think fixing up Germany's creaking infrastructure needs to be part of this effort. They argue that when heavy equipment such as tanks are transported through Germany, solid roads and railways would contribute to the country's strategic readiness. If tanks can't be moved quickly because too many bridges no longer support loads of 100 tons, and we have hundreds of militarily relevant bridges that can't take 100 tons, then military equipment is also of no use. Reintroducing compulsory military service, as some are arguing for, would also be a big drain on budgets for accommodation, equipment and training. Germany's aim now seems fixed on giving more money to the military. But it could get very expensive indeed.
A clear majority of the German population is in favor of spending more money on defense and infrastructure and taking on more debt for it all. I asked DW chief political correspondent Nina Hase if this was a clear sign of the times.
Well, I think I have to quote Bob Dylan here. The times, they are a-changing, Nicole. But yes, it's astonishing, isn't it? The US is seemingly letting down countries that are fighting for their lives to defend their freedom, and the Germans no longer care about debt. Welcome to a completely new reality. So many Germans saw how the Ukrainian president was treated in the Oval Office last Friday. The writing had been on the wall. Experts have been warning for years that Europe needed to do more for its own defense. But I do believe that that scene really brought it home to many people here in Germany that Angela Merkel was right a few years ago when she warned that we can no longer completely rely on the United States for our own defense. And that had sort of been taken for granted here. And people are now beginning to understand that it can't be fixed at the pace by just praying for economic recovery. And the other thing, everyone in this country can see and feel every day that we need to invest massively into our infrastructure. And that, I think, has, by the way, contributed to that feeling of the politicians up there are no longer listening, or why aren't they doing anything against those potholes in the roads, collapsing bridges, etc. They're not just personally annoying things, they're also factors that are affecting our economy in a bad way.
Then there's also the question of personnel. The German military has long been struggling to recruit. How do Germans feel about reintroducing mandatory military service?
Well, that has become a topic of discussion at dinner tables in families, you know, grandparents worrying about their grandchildren and the mothers and fathers saying, yeah, but we do have to defend ourselves. So we've significantly reduced defense spending since the end of the Cold War, and we also paused conscription. We thought those days were over, but there's an increasing understanding now. Already last summer, the majority of Germans said in a poll that they were in favour of reintroducing mandatory military conscription and that we need to have arms to stop anyone who might otherwise be tempted to attack us. So the Bundeswehr is currently aiming to have some 203,000 soldiers, but we're not even reaching that goal. We only have about 180,000, so we need to recruit personnel anyway. And the German defense minister already has a plan in the drawer that was stopped by Olaf Scholz at the time. But there are no illusions anymore. Some form or another of military conscription will come back to Germany.
The past couple of weeks, Nina, have seen a lot of turbulence in international relations, of course, including the Trump administration cutting military aid and intelligence support to Ukraine. So Germans will also ask which countries they trust most. And France tops that list with 85%. The UK is a close second on 78%. Ukraine is trusted by 44% of Germans there, while the US has slumped to a trust rating of just 16%. So the trust in the U.S. is at a new low, even below the values from Trump's first term in office. How do you expect all of this to affect transnational relations?
Well, I think you could see some very specific consequences already in Brussels when you were watching the meeting of EU leaders and how they talked about rearming Europe and entering that race and potentially trying to win this race. So that is a very, very specific consequence of the signs that we're hearing from Washington. So European countries are planning to increase defense spending. Some have started to talk about an old idea again to set up a European army. And that's also interesting because opinion on that has changed here on the continent and also here in Germany. In a poll that was published on Thursday, the vast majority of Germans, so 71%, said that they are now in favour of establishing a European army. That's up 12%. So the support for a European army over the past 2 years has been shooting up. The trend was downwards until mid-2023, but since then it has sharply shot up.
And Germans on the other end of that spectrum trust the French the most. Where do bilateral ties stand right now, and where do you see them going under the leadership of Friedrich Merz?
Well, you do have to say that there was really very little chemistry between the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and the French President Emmanuel Macron, and that is very diplomatically put. And the Franco-German relationship always depends on who's running the country. There have been great partnerships, friendships over the past couple of decades, and that was always tangible then. It translated into concrete action. These two countries can get a lot of things started and running. And Friedrich Merz and Emmanuel Macron, so Friedrich Merz, the likely next German Chancellor, they're different in age, but they've got one thing in common. They're both firm believers in that other America, so the non-Trump America and all its values. They speak fluent English and they have already met. And it also helps that the German defense minister, Boris Pistorius, calls the French defense minister his very close friend. And Boris Pistorius also speaks fluent French.
That's DW Chief Political Correspondent Nina Haase. Thanks for that.